Hi guys, it's Mrs. Locke. I really miss story time. Miss reading out loud to you guys, but I found a way to keep doing it. I'm going to pick a book off of Epic, and it'll be on my screen for me to read, but you'll still be able to see me here reading it. I just won't be holding up a book, but I thought that could maybe work for story time. So, on your screen right now, you're seeing the Epic website. I went up here to the search box and I typed in biography. Now, we learned that a biography is a book that's written about somebody. Could be a famous person, doesn't necessarily have to be. So when I typed in biography and I clicked on the magnifying glass, I found a ton of books. I'm going to say I found a plethora of books. Plethora is a fancy way of saying a lot. These are all books written about famous people. So I was scrolling through. Oh, Helen Keller, I know her. Taylor Swift, I know who that is. Oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Oh, hey, there's presidents that you can read about. Ah, there's the Dr. Seuss book. And then I came upon, where was it? I kept scrolling and scrolling to this book over here, right down there. It's called The Boo-Boos That Changed the World, a true story about an accidental invention. Really? And I thought, ooh, that sounds super interesting. It's with the biography, so it must be a book about somebody. So I'm thinking it's about the person who invented the Band-Aid. So that's what I'm going to do for story time. Okay? So you can see me up here reading to you, but you can also follow along on the screen. Okay, here we go. The Boo-Boos That Changed the World. A true story about an accidental invention. Really? There we go. This book was written by a guy named Barry Wittenstein, and it was illustrated by a guy named Chris Sue, is I think how you pronounce that. And it says here, did you know Band-Aids were invented by accident? I did not know that. I'm adding that to my head right now. And that they weren't mass produced until the Boy Scouts gave their seal of approval. No idea. Wow. All right, let's get started. Once upon a time in 1917, actually, a cotton buyer named Earl Dixon married his beloved Josephine, and they lived happily ever after. The end. What? Wait a second. A one-page book? I've never ever heard of such a thing. Actually, that was just the beginning. The newlyweds expected to live a quiet life in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Instead, Earl and Josephine ended up changing the world one boo-boo at a time. You see, Josephine was accident prone. She often bumped and bruised herself while working around the house. But that was nothing compared to how often she injured herself in the kitchen. This lady kind of sounds like me. I'm always bumping into things and always have boo-boos. Oh my goodness. Ouch! When she sliced and diced an onion, she sometimes sliced her finger too. Boo-hoo! When she grated cheese, she sometimes grated her knuckles. Arg! When she lifted a hot pot off the stove, she sometimes burned her hand. After Josephine winced in pain, she quickly grabbed a rag to stop the bleeding. But with bulky towels between her fingers, it was even harder for Josephine to hold a knife, and she became even more accident prone. Impossible, you say? It's true. Every night when Earl came home from work, he looked forward to talking with Josephine and eating the wonderful meal she had prepared. That was until he saw his beloved's hands. Yikes! Her cuts might get infected. He had to help his new bride. Stop for a second. Are you wondering, what does infected mean? Well, I think what it means is when a cut doesn't get better, it gets worse. And it might continue bleeding, it might get really red, and eventually it could turn into a big problem. Okay. Earl's father was a doctor, so Earl knew a little bit about boo-boos and bandages. And luckily, he worked for a company that manufactured hospital supplies. Earl knew there had to be a solution, but what was it? Earl thought while he shaved in the morning. Maybe if I. Earl thought while he bought cotton in the afternoon. Then I could. And Earl thought some more while he lay in bed at night. Oh, that would solve. Finally, a light bulb went off over his head. I got it! Earl yelled with excitement, waking up Josephine. What have you got? She asked. The bloody solution, of course, Earl replied. The next morning, Earl tried out his idea. Step 1. He took a long piece of adhesive tape and laid it on the kitchen table, sticky side up. Step 2. Earl cut small squares of sterile gauze and stuck them on the tape every few inches. Now, if you look at the illustration, those little white round things, that's the sterile gauze. Sterile means nobody's touched it. There's no germs on it. And gauze is kind of like a very light, thready kind of material. Step 3. He placed a material called crinoline on top of the adhesive tape to keep the whole strip sterile. Clean, no germs on it. It's perfect, Earl said proudly. Now, all Josephine had to do was cut off a piece of the longer strip and put it on. She didn't need anybody's help. She needed only one hand. It worked. At last, they lived happily ever after. The end. I have a feeling that's not the end. But wait. Here comes the part about how Earl and Josephine changed the whole world. Earl guessed there were probably hundreds, possibly even thousands of people who could benefit from his new invention. Earl and Josephine thought about making bandages themselves, but they soon realized it was a big job. Earl told one of his co-workers about it, and the co-worker encouraged Earl to meet with the company's president. At first, Earl's boss, James Johnson, wasn't quite sure Earl's idea was good enough. Earl demonstrated how easy it was to put the bandage on. Then Mr. Johnson saw his own light bulb. The company agreed to produce and sell the product. They combined the words bandage and first aid to create the clever name Band-Aid. Whoa, I'm adding that to my brain. I had no idea. Bandage, first aid, boom, Band-Aid. Now Earl and Josephine would surely live happily ever after because Band-Aids were guaranteed to be an instant success. And with that, we have come to the end. Thank you, and good night. Oops, not yet, sorry. That first year, Band-Aids were made in a factory. It was a slower than slow process, and only a small number could be manufactured by hand. They came rolled up and were 18 ridiculous inches long. 18 inches, probably about like that long. And 3 inches wide, probably about that wide. And they still had to be cut into pieces. Earl, Josephine, and Mr. Johnson had high expectations, but the Band-Aid boxes collected dust. Ignored and unwanted. What does that mean? They collected dust. The Band-Aid boxes. I'm thinking they didn't get used for whatever reason. They just sat there. I have a feeling that's going to change. A few years later, the company invented a machine that could mass produce thousands of the bandages. Instead of the user having to cut them up, each one was ready to go. Band-Aids were now about 3 inches long and an inch wide. And they were cute, too. Each one had a little red string to pull in order to open the paper wrapper. Success! Band-Aids flew off the shelves. The end. Not really. Unfortunately, even with the cute red string and the convenient size, the public was not sold on the idea. Mr. Johnson knew there had to be a solution. What happened next was truly a stroke of genius, which means it was a great idea. The company decided to give the Band-Aids away. Mr. Johnson wondered who needed self-adhesive bandages the most, and then the light bulb went off again. The Boy Scouts, of course. All those fall down, climb up, scratched elbow, scraped knees boys got plenty of cuts. It didn't take long before the mothers of those rough and tumble boys saw how handy the little bandages were. That did it. Earl and Josephine's invention was a smash. During World War II, the company sent millions of free Band-Aids to the brave soldiers fighting overseas. In the years that followed, Band-Aids were made in different sizes, colors, and designs. Some even had pictures of cartoon characters on them. And that continues to this day, all over the world. From boisterous hot dog vendors in Brooklyn, fancy French winemakers, tired taxi drivers in Denmark, and English bobbies on bicycles. Bobbies is a way of saying policemen. To daredevil skateboarders in Saskatchewan, king crab fishermen in Alaska, sweaty Ugandan soccer players, and applauding audiences at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. The sounds of "Aiya!" "Ah!" and "Ouch!" still echo, but not for long. Before I turn the page, I'm noticing something. Look at the page here. So this is the earth. And I'm noticing that there are all of these words and symbols on the page. And here's what I think is going on. This one says, ow! And then way down here, that thing keeps popping up, it says, ouch. And so I think these are different ways in different languages around the world to say ouch. And I recognize one of them. This one right here, A-I-E. I'm going to click on it and see what happens. Oh, nothing. I thought it would maybe read it for us, but I know how to read it. It's French. When you hurt yourself in French, you say, aïe! So, now you know a new way to say ouch the next time you get hurt. Tuck that in there. Aïe! Because soon those snivels and sobs of pain are silenced by Earl and Josephine's accidental boo-boo invention. And that is the happiest ending of all. The end. Really. This is making me think of then and now. So I don't know if they're still alive now, but this is what they looked like later in life. And if we flip back pages until we see them again, right here, this is what they looked like a long time ago when they were young. So their story really spans a long time. Now wait, I want to go back. When did he invent that? Did it say what year? 19 something, I'm sure. No, it doesn't say. I wonder how long ago. Was it 10 years ago? 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years ago? I don't know. Whoa. I gotta move myself here. There is a timeline. Now we know what a timeline is because we've started learning about then and now, and it's a line that has years on it, so you can tell how long ago things happened. So this right here shows Earl Dickinson's timeline. It says, oh, way back in 1892 he was born. And let's see. Oh, 1917 is when he married Josephine. That's the beginning of the book. And then in 1920, he devises a simple sterile dressing that Josephine can apply to her own hand or arm. Yep. And the first Band-Aids are handmade and marketed by J&J. I know what that stands for. His boss's name was Mr. Johnson. So I think Mr. Johnson had a brother, and they had this big company, the hospital supply company that Earl worked for. They call it Johnson and Johnson. And Johnson and Johnson is a huge company and makes tons of different things. Interesting. Oh, 1924 is when the Band-Aids were first mass produced, meaning the machines made lots of them at a time, so you didn't have to sit there and do it by hand. Wow. Let me see anything else. Wow, this is so interesting. Huh. Very cool. And then there's another timeline over here about other medical inventions from the 1920s and 1930s. So 1920, that's 100 years ago. So Band-Aids are 100 years old. They've been around for that long. And I don't think they've changed that much. I mean, some things change a lot over time, but some things don't. So, wow, the next time you get a boo-boo, you get an owie, or in French, I think we say bobo, you can get a Band-Aid, put it on, and you can think about Earl and Josephine and how they invented Band-Aids. I love this book. There's one more page here. Okay. So if you want to learn more, there's some things here you can check out. So this book, let me close the book. This book, The Boo-Boos That Changed the World, is in Epic. So if you want to read it, or if you want to look at those last few pages, because I didn't read all of the information on there, you totally can. I loved that book. Now, if I were to rate this book, I would rate it a 5, and here's why. It was an interesting story. I learned some new things. I really liked the illustrations. They were really pretty. Yeah, I would definitely give this book a 5. All right. Thank you for listening to a story and doing story time with me. And I'll see you next time. Bye.